Some people destroy their own future the moment they laugh at the quietest person in the room. The chandelier light shimmered across hundreds of crystal glasses as Manhattan's elite filled the Grand Aurelia ballroom with soft laughter, expensive perfume, and the low hum of billion-dollar conversations. Outside, cold November rain painted silver streaks against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Inside, everything looked perfect. Perfect flowers. Perfect orchestra. Perfect bride. Perfect billionaire groom. Ethan Callaway stood near the center of the ballroom in a black tuxedo tailored so sharply it looked carved onto his body. At 38, the founder of Callaway Technologies had become one of the youngest billionaires in America, a man business magazines called the King of Calculated Decisions. People feared him because he rarely smiled. Tonight, however, he did. Cameras followed him everywhere as guests raised champagne glasses beneath the golden lights. Senators shook his hand. CEOs laughed too loudly at his jokes. Investors watched him the way people watched private jets disappear into the clouds. Untouchable. That was the word most people used for Ethan Callaway. Untouchable. Near the back of the ballroom, Claire Bennett carried a silver tray filled with champagne flutes through the crowd with careful hands. Black uniform, white gloves, hair tied neatly behind her neck, quiet blue eyes that never stayed in one place too long. Most guests never looked directly at her. Waitresses were invisible at weddings like this, especially quiet ones. Claire preferred it that way. Table 7 needs fresh glasses, another server whispered as she passed. Claire nodded once. No wasted words. No unnecessary movement. She moved through the ballroom like a shadow beneath crystal light while the string quartet played softly near the stage. Then she heard it. By midnight, the bride whispered quietly near the floral arch. The company is ours. Claire froze for half a second. Just half a second. But it was enough. Vanessa Whitmore stood near the wedding planner with a gentle smile painted perfectly across her face, one manicured hand resting lightly against Ethan's arm. Beautiful. Elegant. America's favorite future billionaire wife. But the man standing beside her was not a wedding planner. Claire noticed the tiny movement first. A folded document slipping into his jacket pocket. Then the bracelet on Vanessa's wrist. Gold with a small emerald clasp. Claire's fingers tightened around the tray instantly. Her breathing slowed. No, it couldn't be. The same bracelet. The same symbol her father once showed her before everything in their lives collapsed. The orchestra swelled louder. Claire turned too quickly. One guest stepped backward unexpectedly. Her shoulder clipped the edge of the tray. Crystal exploded across the marble floor. The sound cut through the ballroom like gunfire. Music stopped. Conversations vanished. Hundreds of heads turned at once. Champagne spilled across white marble beneath the chandeliers, while broken glass scattered around Claire's black shoes. Silence. Heavy silence. Ethan Callaway slowly looked down at the mess. Then at Claire. The room waited. Claire bent immediately. I'm sorry, she said softly, kneeling to gather the broken pieces carefully with trembling fingers. Careful, one guest muttered. She'll cut herself. Ethan exhaled sharply through his nose. Not angry. Worse. Amused. Interesting timing, he said calmly, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. A few guests laughed nervously. Claire kept her eyes lowered. I apologize, sir. Ethan stepped closer, expensive leather shoes stopping inches from shattered crystal. You know, he said, adjusting one cufflink slowly. Most people speak when they're nervous. More soft laughter spread across the ballroom. But you, his eyes narrowed slightly. You barely speak at all. Claire remained silent. Cat got your tongue? Someone near the bar joked. This time the laughter grew louder. Vanessa smiled politely beside Ethan, though her eyes stayed cold. Claire finished gathering the final shard carefully into a napkin. Her fingers were steady now. Too steady. Ethan noticed. Look at me when I'm speaking to you, he said. The ballroom grew quieter. Claire slowly stood. Her blue eyes finally met his. Calm. Clear. Unafraid. Something about that expression irritated Ethan instantly. She wasn't embarrassed enough. Most employees apologized twice by now. Some cried. This waitress simply stood there beneath the chandelier light, like she could already see something no one else could. Ethan gave a small mocking smile. Let me guess, he said. You're one of those silent observers who thinks they understand powerful people better than the rest of us. A few nearby guests chuckled again. Claire looked toward Vanessa briefly, then back at Ethan. Rain tapped softly against the giant windows behind them. The orchestra players remained frozen with instruments in hand. Even the photographers had stopped moving. Claire spoke so quietly Ethan almost didn't hear her. "Don't marry her." Silence crushed the room instantly. Every smile disappeared. Ethan blinked once. Vanessa's face lost color for half a second before recovering. "Excuse me?" Ethan asked coldly. Claire's voice stayed calm. "If this wedding happens tonight," she said softly, "your family will lose everything." No one moved. No one breathed. Somewhere near the ballroom entrance, a champagne glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered against the floor. The silence inside the Grand Aurelia ballroom felt heavier than the rain pounding against the windows. Nobody moved. Nobody even looked at the orchestra anymore. Every eye remained locked on Claire Bennett. Ethan Calloway stared at her as if he could not decide whether she was insane or dangerous. Vanessa Whitmore recovered first. Her polished smile returned carefully, almost perfectly, but her fingers tightened around Ethan's arm just enough for Claire to notice. "I think," Vanessa said softly with a nervous laugh, "someone has had a very stressful evening." A few guests forced uncomfortable chuckles. Nobody wanted tension at a billionaire wedding, especially not tension caused by a waitress. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Security," he said calmly, without taking his eyes off Claire. Two hotel security guards immediately stepped forward from near the ballroom entrance. Claire did not resist. She simply looked at Ethan one last time. "Check the foundation accounts," she said quietly, "especially the transfers connected to Whitmore Global Holdings." Ethan's expression darkened instantly. Vanessa's smile flickered again. Tiny, almost invisible, but Claire saw it. Then the guards escorted her through the ballroom, while whispers spread like wildfire beneath crystal light. "Who is she? What was that about? Did she say foundation accounts? This is insane." Claire kept her head down as she walked past tables filled with diamonds, tuxedos, and billion-dollar reputations. The rain outside grew harder. Thunder rolled softly over Manhattan. Near the service hallway, one of the younger security guards glanced at her carefully. "You really should not have said that in there," he muttered. Claire gave a faint smile that never reached her eyes. "I know." They stopped beside the employee elevators. The older guard crossed his arms. "You planning to explain any of this?" Claire looked toward the ballroom doors far behind them. Soft music had started again. Forced music. The kind people played when they wanted to pretend nothing happened. "No," she said quietly, "because he would not believe me anyway." Upstairs, nearly 300 feet above Park Avenue, lightning flashed across the city skyline, while Claire stepped into her tiny apartment 35 minutes later. The room smelled faintly like old books and coffee. Small, clean, quiet. A completely different world from the ballroom she had just left behind. She removed her waitress heels slowly and placed them beside the door with careful precision. Then she walked toward the kitchen counter where stacks of papers sat beneath a dim lamp. Financial statements, printed transaction records, charity filings, offshore account transfers, names circled in blue ink. Claire stared at them for a long moment before pulling the emerald bracelet sketch from the top drawer. Her father had drawn it himself 6 years earlier. She remembered the exact night. Rain against the windows, cold coffee untouched beside his desk. His exhausted voice saying the same sentence over and over again. "If anything happens to me, follow the money." Claire closed her eyes briefly. 6 years ago, Richard Bennett had been one of the most respected forensic accountants in New York. Brilliant, quiet, careful. He spent 20 years uncovering financial corruption for major law firms and nonprofit organizations. Then he discovered something connected to Whitmore Global Holdings. 2 months later, his reputation collapsed overnight. Anonymous accusations, fake reports, frozen accounts. Every television station called him corrupt before any investigation finished. Claire still remembered reporters standing outside their apartment building while neighbors avoided eye contact in elevators. Her father stopped sleeping after that. 3 weeks later, he was gone. The city called it stress, depression, professional disgrace. Claire called it something else. She never stopped looking. Her tiny apartment became filled with hidden records and handwritten notes while she worked double shifts across Manhattan restaurants just to survive. Nobody noticed the quiet waitress carrying financial documents inside grocery bags at 2 in the morning. Nobody noticed the woman sitting alone in 24-hour diners reviewing nonprofit tax filings while snow covered the streets outside. That was the advantage of being invisible. Powerful people rarely noticed invisible women. Claire opened one folder carefully. Ethan Callaway's foundation records. Millions donated every year to hospitals, education programs, and veterans charities. Publicly, the foundation looked flawless. Privately, however, money had started disappearing 18 months ago through layered shell companies connected to overseas accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Always carefully hidden. Always routed through companies tied somehow to Vanessa Whitmore's business network. Claire walked toward the window overlooking the wet Manhattan streets below. Yellow taxis blurred through the rain while distant sirens echoed between buildings. Somewhere across the city, Ethan Callaway was probably furious. Humiliated. Confused. She should have stayed quiet tonight. That would have been smarter. Safer. But the moment she saw that bracelet on Vanessa's wrist, she knew exactly who she was dealing with. The same family name connected to her father's collapse. The same network of financial predators hiding behind charity galas and luxury foundations. Claire rested one hand lightly against the cold glass. "You still do not see them," she whispered softly. Her phone suddenly buzzed against the counter. Unknown number. Claire stared at it for 3 seconds before answering carefully. "Hello." Silence. Then a calm older woman's voice spoke quietly through the speaker. "Miss Bennett." Claire's expression shifted instantly. "Yes. This is Eleanor Callaway, Ethan's mother." Claire stood completely still. Rain hammered harder outside. "I believe," Eleanor said carefully, "you owe me an explanation before my son marries the wrong woman tomorrow morning." Claire arrived at the Callaway penthouse just after midnight, while rain still soaked the streets below Manhattan's glowing skyline. The elevator doors opened directly into silence. Not ordinary silence. Wealthy silence. The kind that lived inside rooms too expensive for noise. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park beneath sheets of silver rain, while soft jazz played somewhere distant through hidden speakers. Eleanor Callaway stood beside the fireplace waiting for her. Elegant black silk. Silver hair perfectly arranged. Calm posture sharpened by decades of surviving powerful men. Ethan had inherited his eyes from her. Cold gray when guarded. Gentle only when nobody was looking. Claire stepped carefully across the marble floor holding a thick leather folder against her chest. Eleanor studied her quietly for several seconds. Not like a billionaire's mother looking at a waitress. More like a woman trying to solve a puzzle she could not ignore anymore. "You are younger than I expected," Eleanor said finally. Claire gave a small nod. "Most people say that." Eleanor motioned toward the sitting area near the windows. "Sit down, Miss Bennett." Claire sat carefully on the edge of the cream-colored sofa while thunder rolled softly outside. Everything inside the penthouse looked controlled. Perfect artwork. Perfect lighting. Perfect order. But Claire noticed the unfinished whiskey glass near the piano immediately. Ethan's. Untouched for nearly an hour. Eleanor noticed her noticing it. "He left 20 minutes ago," she said quietly. "He is angry." Claire lowered her eyes. "He should be." Eleanor remained standing for a moment before finally sitting across from her. "My son does not trust people easily." Claire almost smiled. "I noticed." "And yet," Eleanor continued softly, "he looked more unsettled tonight than I have seen in years." Rain slid slowly down the giant windows behind her. "Tell me why." Claire hesitated. Not because she was afraid. Because once she started speaking, there would be no way to undo any of it. Eleanor waited patiently. Powerful women understood silence better than most people. Finally, Claire placed the leather folder carefully onto the glass coffee table between them. 6 years ago," she said quietly, "my father discovered fraudulent transfers moving through nonprofit foundations connected to Whitmore Global Holdings." Eleanor's expression changed almost imperceptibly. "Vanessa's family company." Claire nodded once. "My father was a forensic accountant. He specialized in financial corruption investigations." She slid several printed documents across the table. Offshore transfers. Shell corporations. Fake charity distributions. Eleanor adjusted her glasses slowly while scanning the pages beneath the warm light. The room grew quieter with every second. "These accounts," Eleanor whispered carefully, "are connected to the Callaway Foundation." Claire nodded again. "Somebody has been siphoning money through layered partnerships for almost 18 months. Eleanor looked up sharply. How much? Claire's voice remained calm. Approximately $48 million. The jazz music stopped somewhere deeper inside the penthouse. Neither woman moved. Eleanor slowly removed her glasses. Why not go to the authorities? Claire looked toward the rain outside. Because 6 years ago my father tried. Silence again. Heavy silence. Eleanor's expression softened slightly for the first time. Richard Bennett, she said suddenly. Claire blinked in surprise. You remember him? Eleanor leaned back slowly against the sofa. Your father testified during a corruption hearing involving several New York charities years ago. She looked down at the papers again. He was respected. Claire's fingers tightened together quietly in her lap. Until he found something people wanted buried. Eleanor said nothing. Claire continued carefully. 3 months after he started investigating Whitmore financial networks, fake accusations appeared against him. Clients disappeared overnight. Reporters destroyed his reputation before any evidence existed. Her voice never cracked. That somehow made it sadder. He spent the last weeks of his life trying to prove he was innocent. Rain hammered harder against the glass now. Manhattan lights blurred across the wet skyline like fading stars. Eleanor studied Claire with growing understanding. And you think Vanessa is connected to all of this? Claire slowly reached into the folder again and removed a printed photograph. Vanessa standing beside 2 executives outside a private charity gala in Zurich. One of the men had already been indicted overseas for financial fraud. That picture was taken 14 months ago, Claire explained softly. 2 months before the missing transfers from your foundation began. Eleanor stared at the image for a long time. Why tonight? She asked quietly. Why wait until the wedding? Claire swallowed slowly. Because I did not know Vanessa Whitmore was involved until tonight. She reached into her bag and unfolded the bracelet sketch drawn by her father years earlier. I saw the emerald clasp on her wrist. Eleanor's eyes narrowed instantly. The same design. My father called it their signature. Claire looked down at the sketch carefully. He once told me some wealthy people never leave fingerprints. They leave symbols. Eleanor sat completely still now. No movement. No sound except rain and distant thunder rolling across Manhattan. Finally she whispered something so quietly Claire almost missed it. Dear God. Then the penthouse doors opened suddenly. Ethan Calloway walked inside still wearing his tuxedo, rain darkening the shoulders of his coat. He stopped cold the moment he saw Claire sitting beside his mother. His expression hardened instantly. What is she doing here? Eleanor rose slowly before Claire could speak. Sit down, Ethan. Mother. Sit down. Something in Eleanor's voice made him obey despite the anger burning behind his eyes. Ethan loosened his tie sharply while staring directly at Claire. You embarrassed me in front of 300 people. Claire met his gaze calmly. I know. You accused my fiancée of fraud. Because she is involved. Ethan laughed once. Cold. Disbelieving. Do you realize how insane this sounds? Claire reached quietly into the folder and slid the Zurich photograph across the table toward him. Ethan picked it up carelessly at first. Then his expression changed. Just slightly. Where did you get this? Claire did not answer immediately. She simply looked at him beneath the soft penthouse light while rain covered the city outside. I have been following Vanessa Whitmore for almost 2 years, she said softly. Because I believe the people around her destroyed my father's life. Ethan Calloway stared at the photograph in silence while rain rolled down the penthouse windows behind him. The room suddenly felt colder. Claire watched the tiny shifts in his expression carefully. Confusion first, then calculation, then denial. Powerful men often followed that exact order when the truth arrived uninvited. Ethan placed the photograph down slowly on the glass table. One picture proves nothing, he said calmly, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. Claire nodded once. That is why there is more. She slid another folder toward him. Tax filings. Transaction summaries. Corporate registrations from Switzerland, Luxembourg, and the Cayman Islands. Ethan flipped through the pages faster now, his jaw tightening with every document. Eleanor remained silent beside the fireplace, watching her son carefully instead of the papers. She knew that look. Ethan only read that quickly when something frightened him. These companies are fake, Claire explained softly. They exist only to move money through non-profit channels without attracting attention. Ethan stopped at one page instantly. A highlighted account number. His expression darkened. This account belongs to the Calloway Foundation. Claire nodded. Yes. Impossible. It was authorized through secondary financial approvals 18 months ago. Ethan looked up sharply. Only 3 people had access to secondary approval authorization. Claire held his gaze calmly. You, your chief financial officer, and the person managing your foundation restructuring after the engagement announcement. Silence. Ethan slowly looked back down at the documents. Vanessa had overseen most of the foundation restructuring personally after their engagement became public. At the time, the media praised her constantly for it. Beautiful future wife modernizes billionaire charity operations. Claire still remembered seeing those headlines while eating microwave noodles alone at 2 in the morning inside her tiny apartment. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose. Even if any of this were true, he said carefully, why not contact federal investigators? Claire looked toward the rain outside. Because powerful people protect each other long before investigators arrive. Eleanor crossed her arms quietly. You believe Vanessa has connections inside the financial system? Claire gave a small nod. I know she does. Ethan stood abruptly and walked toward the windows overlooking Manhattan. The city lights reflected across the glass beside his silhouette. For the first time that night, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man standing near the edge of something dangerous. You are asking me to believe that the woman I am marrying built an 18-month fraud operation around my foundation. Claire answered softly behind him. No, Ethan turned slightly. I am asking you to believe she is not the person you think she is. Thunder rolled across the skyline again. Ethan rubbed one hand slowly across his mouth while thinking. Claire could almost hear the calculations happening inside his head. Numbers. Timelines. Risk. Reputation. Betrayal. Men like Ethan Calloway survived by controlling every variable around them. Tonight, for the first time in years, something existed outside his control. His phone suddenly buzzed against the counter. Vanessa. Ethan stared at the screen for 3 seconds before answering. What? His voice became colder instantly. Claire lowered her eyes respectfully, while Eleanor remained completely still. Vanessa's soft voice echoed faintly through the speaker. Ethan, where are you? With my mother. A pause. Everyone is asking questions after tonight. I imagine they are. Another pause. Longer this time. You left without saying anything. Ethan's eyes drifted toward the financial records spread across the table. I needed air. Vanessa laughed softly, but the sound felt strained now. Well, come back soon. We have interviews at 9 tomorrow morning, and the wedding rehearsal breakfast starts at 10. Claire noticed Ethan's hand tighten slightly around the phone. Tiny details mattered. Tiny reactions revealed fear long before words did. Vanessa continued carefully. And Ethan? What? Do not let some unstable waitress ruin our night. Claire looked down quietly. Ethan did not answer immediately. Finally, he said, I will handle it. Then he ended the call. The silence afterward felt enormous. Ethan remained facing the windows for nearly 20 seconds before finally speaking again. You said your father warned you before he died. Claire's expression softened almost invisibly. Yes. What exactly did he tell you? She hesitated. Memories moved behind her eyes like distant storms. Her father sitting beneath a desk lamp at 3 in the morning. Coffee gone cold beside stacks of files. Dark circles beneath exhausted eyes. He said some people build fortunes the way thieves build escape routes. Ethan turned slowly toward her. Claire continued softly. Layer by layer. Company by company. Charity by charity. Until nobody remembers where the money actually came from. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Ethan walked back toward the table and picked up the bracelet sketch Claire's father had drawn years earlier. This symbol, he said carefully. You are certain Vanessa's bracelet matched it? Exactly. Ethan stared at the emerald design for a long moment. Then something shifted inside him. Small. Quiet. Dangerous. Tomorrow morning, he said finally. I want access to everything you have. Claire blinked once. Everything. Every file. Every transaction. Every connection. Ethan's voice sharpened now, the businessman returning beneath the shock. If somebody has been using my foundation as a laundering operation, I will find out myself. Claire studied him carefully beneath the warm penthouse light. For the first time all night, she saw something other than arrogance in his eyes. Hurt. Not from money. From betrayal. Eleanor noticed it too. Ethan, she said quietly, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Miss Bennett may be telling the truth. Ethan gave a bitter laugh without humor. I know. Then his eyes lifted slowly toward Claire again. "What I do not know," he said softly, "is why you are helping me after the way I treated you tonight." Claire looked at him for a long moment while rain whispered against the windows behind them. "Because my father spent his last days trying to stop people like this," she said quietly. "And because humiliation feels very small compared to losing your family forever." Ethan said nothing after that. He simply stood there beneath the city lights holding the bracelet sketch while somewhere deep inside the penthouse, the grandfather clock struck 1 in the morning. By 7:30 the next morning, Manhattan looked washed clean beneath pale gray skies and cold November wind. Black SUVs lined the curb outside Callaway Technologies while reporters gathered behind metal barriers hoping for wedding photos before the ceremony began. Nobody inside the building smiled. Ethan Callaway had canceled every morning interview without explanation. That alone was enough to make executives nervous. Claire sat quietly at the far end of the 42nd floor conference room while giant digital screens displayed thousands of financial records across the walls. The room smelled like coffee, stress, and expensive cologne. 3 forensic analysts worked silently beside Ethan's legal team while Eleanor remained near the windows watching the city below. Claire noticed how differently people treated her now. 12 hours earlier, she had been invisible. This morning, every executive entering the room glanced at her carefully before speaking. Fear changed people quickly. Ethan stood near the center table with sleeves rolled above his wrists, staring at highlighted transaction timelines projected across the screen. He had not slept. Claire could see it in the tension beneath his eyes and the untouched black coffee cooling beside him. "Run the Zurich transfers again," Ethan ordered sharply. One analyst adjusted his glasses nervously. "We already verified them twice." "Then verify them a third time." His voice cut through the room like cold steel. Nobody argued. Claire lowered her eyes slightly. This was the version of Ethan Callaway that built billion-dollar companies from nothing. Ruthless focus, controlled intensity, the ability to keep moving even while the ground beneath him cracked apart. An older attorney approached carefully holding a printed report. "Mr. Callaway," he said quietly, "we found additional shell accounts connected to Whitmore Global Holdings." Ethan took the pages instantly. His jaw tightened harder with every line he read. "How much?" "Combined." The attorney swallowed. "Approximately $72 million moved over 16 months. Silence swallowed the room. Even the analysts stopped typing. Ethan slowly looked toward Claire. Not angry anymore. Something worse. Realization. Claire remained calm beneath his stare. "I told you the numbers would grow," she said softly. Ethan exhaled sharply through his nose and looked away again. Eleanor crossed the room slowly toward the table. "Does Vanessa know we discovered this?" Ethan answered without looking up. "Not yet." Claire suddenly spoke quietly. "She will soon." Ethan looked at her immediately. "Why?" Claire reached into her bag and placed another printed document on the table. "Private airport records. A jet reservation scheduled for midnight that same evening. Destination, Geneva. Because someone booked an international departure under a Whitmore corporate account less than 4 hours ago." Ethan stared at the paper for several long seconds. "You have got to be kidding me." Claire shook her head once. People preparing to disappear move quickly once they sense instability. One of the analysts looked confused. "How did you even get access to this information?" Claire hesitated briefly. "My father taught me where wealthy people hide things." Ethan studied her quietly after that. Every answer she gave sounded simple until people realized how much intelligence hid underneath it. The conference room doors suddenly opened. Vanessa Whitmore walked inside wearing an ivory coat and dark sunglasses despite the cloudy morning. Every conversation died instantly. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor while she removed her sunglasses with graceful precision. Beautiful, elegant, controlled. But Claire noticed the tension beneath her smile immediately. Vanessa's eyes moved across the room quickly before landing on Ethan. "There you are," she said lightly. "Your assistant said you canceled the breakfast." Ethan said nothing. Vanessa glanced around at the screens filled with financial reports and legal documents. "Am I interrupting something?" Nobody answered. The silence itself became an answer. Vanessa's smile faded slightly. "Ethan," he finally looked at her directly. "How long were you planning to use my foundation?" The room froze. Vanessa blinked once. "Excuse me." Ethan tossed the Zurich photograph onto the table between them. Vanessa looked down at it carefully. Too carefully. Claire noticed her breathing slow almost instantly. Calculation. Where did you get this? Vanessa asked quietly. Ethan laughed once without humor. Interesting response. I asked a question, and I asked one first. Vanessa's eyes hardened slightly now. You are letting a waitress manipulate you. Claire remained silent near the end of the table. Vanessa turned toward her sharply. You have no idea who you are dealing with. Claire met her gaze calmly. Actually, I do. Eleanor stepped forward before the tension escalated further. Vanessa, she said quietly, please explain the offshore transfers connected to the foundation. Vanessa looked toward Eleanor with visible disbelief. You too. Answer the question. For the first time since entering the room, Vanessa looked cornered. Tiny cracks appeared beneath the polished image she wore so perfectly. She straightened slowly. Everything I did was approved legally. Ethan's expression darkened. So you admit involvement. Vanessa looked directly at him now. I admit restructuring assets in ways your advisors fully supported. Ethan slammed one hand against the conference table hard enough to make several analysts jump. Do not insult my intelligence. The room fell silent again. Vanessa stared at him for a long moment before speaking softly. You really trust her over me? Ethan did not answer immediately. That hesitation changed everything. Vanessa saw it. Claire saw it. Eleanor saw it. The silence itself became betrayal. Vanessa's eyes shifted slowly toward Claire. Cold now. Sharp enough to cut glass. You should have stayed quiet, she whispered. Claire's voice remained calm. So should the people who stole from dead charities. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Something inside him finally collapsed completely. When he opened them again, the warmth was gone. Cancel the wedding, he said quietly. Nobody moved. Ethan looked toward his legal team. Now, outside the conference room windows, gray clouds rolled slowly across Manhattan, while deep below the tower, reporters still waited for a love story that no longer existed. The first news alert appeared 12 minutes after Ethan canceled the wedding. Then another. Then 20 more. By noon, every financial network in America carried the same breaking headline across glowing screens. Callaway wedding canceled amid foundation investigation. Reporters crowded outside Callaway Technologies beneath cold November wind, while cameras pointed toward the tower like weapons waiting for blood. Inside the executive conference room, nobody spoke above a whisper anymore. Lawyers moved quickly between offices carrying stacks of documents, while forensic analysts continued tracing hidden transfers across multiple countries. Claire sat quietly beside the windows reviewing printed records under soft gray daylight. Her coffee had gone cold nearly an hour earlier. Ethan had not left the room since morning. He stood near the digital screens with one hand resting against his hip, while another analyst explained a complicated chain of shell corporations linked to Luxembourg banking accounts. The money moved through 4 separate nonprofit entities before returning to Whitmore-controlled investment groups, the analyst said nervously. Every layer was designed to appear charitable. Ethan's jaw tightened again. And nobody noticed $72 million disappearing? The analyst swallowed. The transactions were intentionally small at first. That is not what I asked. Silence. Claire watched him quietly. Anger looked different on Ethan now. Last night his anger came from pride. Today it came from betrayal. There was a difference. Eleanor entered the room carrying another folder. The board members are demanding answers. Ethan barely looked up. Tell them they will get answers after legal review finishes. Eleanor placed the folder onto the table carefully. They are also demanding to know why the woman who exposed all of this was working as a waitress instead of inside a financial investigations office. Claire lowered her eyes slightly. Ethan finally looked toward her. Actually, he said quietly, I would like the answer to that too. The room grew still again. Claire remained silent for several seconds while rain tapped softly against the windows. Because nobody hires the daughter of a disgraced accountant, she said finally. Ethan stared at her carefully. Claire continued softly. After my father died, every firm that promised support disappeared overnight. Nobody wanted association with our name. Eleanor's expression saddened slightly. That was 6 years ago. People with power have long memories. Claire folded her hands together calmly. Especially when they are hiding something. Ethan looked away toward the skyline again. Somewhere below them, reporters shouted questions at security guards near the entrance. The world outside was becoming chaos. Inside the room, however, everything felt strangely quiet. Claire had noticed something unusual about wealthy people years ago. The richer the room became, the quieter fears sounded. Ethan's phone buzzed again across the conference table. Unknown international number. He stared at it for a moment before answering. Calloway. Silence answered first. Then a man's voice spoke calmly through the speaker. European accent. Controlled. Mr. Calloway, I believe you have recently encountered difficulties involving Miss Vanessa Whitmore. Every person in the room looked up instantly. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Who is this? Someone who understands how her network operates. Claire's attention sharpened immediately. The voice continued carefully. You should know Miss Whitmore is not acting alone. Ethan switched the call to speaker without warning. Explain. The man paused briefly. Your foundation was selected because your public image created trust. Large charitable organizations attract less scrutiny from international regulators. Claire slowly stood from her chair. She recognized something in the voice. Not the man himself. The fear underneath it. Who are you? She asked quietly. Silence followed again. Then the man answered softly. Your father once tried to warn me too. Claire froze completely. Ethan looked toward her instantly. You know him? No. Her voice almost disappeared. But my father mentioned someone in Zurich. The man exhaled quietly through the speaker. Richard Bennett was one of the few honest men I ever met. Claire's fingers tightened slightly against the table edge. What happened to him? Another silence. Longer this time. He got too close to people who survive by destroying evidence. Ethan's expression darkened immediately. Names. I cannot give you names over this line. Then why call it all? The man's voice lowered. Because Miss Whitmore is leaving the country tonight, and if she succeeds, you will never recover the missing assets. Claire stepped closer to the phone. Geneva? Yes. Ethan's eyes flickered toward her briefly. The man continued. There is also one more thing you should know. Nobody moved. Your father was never under federal investigation, Miss Bennett. Claire stopped breathing for half a second. What? The accusations against him were manufactured privately before regulators ever opened formal review. Eleanor slowly lowered herself into a chair nearby. Ethan stared at the phone silently. The man continued softly. Someone destroyed his reputation before the government even saw the case. Claire's eyes glistened beneath the conference room lights, but her voice remained steady. How do you know this? Because I helped process the original accounts 6 years ago. Ethan stepped forward sharply. Then you were involved. Yes. The honesty startled everyone, and I have regretted it every day since. The line went quiet again except for faint static. Then the man spoke one final sentence. Your father died trying to protect people who never even knew his name. The call disconnected. Silence swallowed the conference room completely. No keyboards. No phones. No movement. Claire stood motionless beside the table while Manhattan blurred behind the rain-covered windows. Ethan looked at her differently now. Not like a waitress. Not like an inconvenience. Like someone carrying years of quiet pain without asking the world to notice. Claire slowly picked up her cold coffee cup, but her hands trembled slightly for the first time all day. Ethan noticed immediately. So did Eleanor. But neither of them said anything. Sometimes silence respected grief better than words ever could. By late afternoon, the storm above Manhattan finally broke apart into pale winter sunlight. But inside Callaway Technologies, the atmosphere remained heavy enough to suffocate. Television screens across the executive floor replayed the same footage endlessly. Vanessa Whitmore leaving the building earlier that morning, surrounded by lawyers and security. Reporters shouting questions. Camera flashes exploding against black SUVs. The wedding cancellation had become national news now. Financial analysts speculated about fraud investigations while social media turned the collapse of America's favorite billionaire romance into entertainment for millions of strangers. Claire sat alone near the empty conference room windows watching helicopters move slowly above the city skyline. For the first time in nearly 24 hours, the building had grown quiet. Most executives had gone home. Legal teams continued working behind closed doors. Ethan remained somewhere inside the tower reviewing emergency financial protections for the foundation. Claire should have left hours ago. Instead, she sat motionless beside the fading daylight with her father's sketch resting quietly in her hands. The emerald bracelet. The symbol that changed everything. You are still here. Ethan's voice broke the silence softly from behind her. Claire turned slightly. He had removed his suit jacket hours earlier, and exhaustion now shadowed his face beneath the conference room lights. Without the cameras and executives surrounding him, he looked older somehow, less untouchable. "I was about to leave," Claire said quietly. Ethan glanced toward the darkening skyline. "You do not sound convincing." A faint, almost smile touched Claire's lips for half a second. Ethan noticed it immediately. Strange how something so small could change the entire feeling of a room. He walked slowly toward the table and placed 2 fresh coffee cups beside her. "Black," he said quietly. "I remembered." Claire looked surprised. "From the ballroom?" Ethan nodded once. "You carried one during your shift." Claire wrapped both hands carefully around the warm cup. "Most people never notice things like that." Ethan gave a bitter laugh under his breath. "Most people also do not spend 2 years secretly uncovering international fraud operations while working dinner service." Silence settled between them again, but softer now, less hostile. Outside the windows, Manhattan glowed gold beneath the final light of sunset, while traffic crawled through wet streets far below. Ethan leaned against the edge of the conference table beside her. "The Zurich contact called again after you left the room earlier." Claire looked up immediately. "What did he say?" Ethan hesitated briefly. "Vanessa's flight was canceled." Claire exhaled quietly. "Good. Apparently, federal investigators intercepted several account transfers this afternoon." Ethan studied her carefully. "You were right about everything." Claire lowered her eyes toward the coffee cup in her hands. "Not everything." Ethan frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" She hesitated long enough for him to notice. "I thought exposing Vanessa would make me feel relieved." Her voice almost disappeared beneath the low hum of the building. "But it does not." Ethan remained silent. Claire stared out toward the skyline again. "My father is still gone." Those 5 words changed something inside him instantly. Not because they were dramatic, because they were quiet. Honest pain rarely needed volume. Ethan slowly sat down across from her. "I spent years thinking power solved everything," he admitted softly. "Money, control, influence. I built entire companies believing if I stayed ahead of everyone else, nobody could ever hurt me." Claire listened quietly. Ethan looked down at his untouched coffee. "Then a waitress walked into my wedding and destroyed my entire understanding of people in less than 24 hours. Claire almost smiled again, but sadness reached her first. "I did not want to destroy anything." "I know." Ethan's voice remained calm now. "That is the part one keep thinking about." The room fell silent again, while sunset faded slowly across Manhattan glass towers. Ethan studied her carefully beneath the soft conference lighting. He remembered the ballroom suddenly. The broken champagne glasses. The way everyone laughed at her. The way he laughed at her. Shame moved quietly across his chest. "Claire." She looked up. Ethan hesitated for the first time since she met him. Billionaires were not supposed to hesitate. "I owe you an apology." Claire blinked softly. Ethan continued before she could answer. "Not because you were right." His jaw tightened slightly. "Because I treated you like you mattered less than everyone else in that room." Claire said nothing. Ethan looked toward the windows briefly before speaking again. "I saw your uniform before I saw you." Silence. Then Claire whispered something so quietly he nearly missed it. "Most people do." Ethan looked back at her immediately. No bitterness existed in her voice. Somehow that made it worse. A soft knock interrupted them before either could continue. Eleanor stepped carefully into the room, carrying another envelope. Her expression looked calmer than it had all day. "Federal investigators confirmed the transfers," she said quietly. "They also reopened Richard Bennett's original case." Claire stood instantly. "What?" Eleanor crossed the room slowly and handed her the envelope. "Official review documents." Claire's fingers trembled slightly while opening it. The words blurred at first beneath sudden tears she fought hard to hide. "Reassessment of prior professional misconduct findings." Ethan watched her carefully while she read. Claire closed her eyes briefly. 6 years. 6 years of whispers behind her back. 6 years of people avoiding her family name. 6 years of carrying shame that never belonged to her father at all. Eleanor touched her shoulder gently. "Your father's record will be cleared." Claire could not speak immediately. The city lights outside shimmered through tears gathering quietly in her eyes. Ethan looked away respectfully toward the windows. Some moments deserved privacy, even inside shared silence. Finally Claire whispered, almost to herself, "He was telling the truth." Eleanor nodded softly. "Yes." The conference room grew still again, while darkness slowly covered Manhattan below. Then Ethan spoke carefully from across the table. "When this is over," he said quietly, "I do not want you returning to that hotel." Claire looked toward him in surprise. Ethan met her eyes steadily now. "People like you should not have to hide behind a waitress uniform just to survive." Claire stared at him for a long moment while distant city lights flickered across the glass around them. Then she gave the smallest smile he had seen yet. "Tired, gentle, real. You finally stopped looking at the uniform," she said softly. 3 weeks later, snow drifted softly across Manhattan sidewalks while the city slowly moved on to newer scandals, newer headlines, newer people to destroy and forget. But inside the Callaway Foundation building on East 57th Street, everything had changed. The giant lobby no longer displayed glamorous engagement photographs or luxury gala advertisements. Instead, new banners hung quietly beside the reception desk. Veterans Education Initiative, Children's Hospital Recovery Fund, Community Transparency Program. Real programs, real numbers, real accountability. Claire stood near the conference room windows reviewing scholarship applications while pale winter sunlight reflected softly against the glass towers outside. She no longer wore a waitress uniform. Today she wore a simple navy sweater and black slacks with her hair resting loosely around her shoulders. Elegant without trying to be, calm without pretending. Several employees walked past her carrying files and coffee cups. Every one of them greeted her respectfully now. Not because Ethan ordered them to, because they knew what she had done. Ethan watched quietly from his office across the hallway. Strange how silence still followed her everywhere she went, but now people listened to it differently. He had spent most of his life surrounded by loud people. Investors, executives, politicians. Everyone always selling certainty. Claire never sold anything. That was why he trusted her. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Eleanor entered carrying 2 folders beneath one arm. "You are staring again," she said calmly. Ethan looked away from the glass wall immediately. "I am working." Eleanor raised one eyebrow. "Of course you are." She placed the folders onto his desk before glancing toward Claire through the office windows. "She changed this building." Ethan leaned back slowly in his chair. "She changed more than that." Eleanor studied her son carefully for several seconds. "You know she still plans to leave next month." Ethan's expression shifted instantly. "Leave where?" "Chicago." Eleanor folded her arms calmly. A financial ethics organization offered her a permanent investigative position. Silence. Ethan looked toward Claire again. She laughed softly at something one of the assistants said near the conference room. Small sound. Gentle sound. He realized suddenly he had never truly heard her laugh before. Eleanor noticed the look in his eyes immediately. "You spent years building walls around yourself," she said quietly. "Do not wait until she walks away to realize someone finally taught you how to lower them." Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose. "Mother, I am serious." She softened slightly. "Claire Bennett protected our family when she had every reason to hate us." Ethan looked down at the unfinished paperwork on his desk. "I know." That evening, snow covered the city in soft white silence while most employees left early ahead of the storm. Claire remained in the conference room organizing final audit files beneath warm, overhead lighting. The building had grown almost empty by 8 o'clock. She barely noticed Ethan entering until he placed a paper cup of coffee beside her elbow. "Black," he said quietly. Claire smiled faintly without looking up. "You remembered again." Ethan sat across from her while snow drifted outside the windows behind them. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. Just honest. Claire closed another folder carefully. "The scholarship numbers look good." Ethan nodded. Applications increased 40% after the transparency announcement. Claire looked genuinely happy at that. Ethan noticed. She never smiled for money. Never smiled for approval. Only for things that mattered. "I cleared your father's final records personally this morning," Ethan said quietly. Claire stopped moving. Officially. Officially. Her eyes lowered slowly toward the papers in front of her. Ethan continued carefully. "Every accusation was removed from the public database." Claire swallowed softly. "Thank you." Ethan shook his head once. No, his voice remained calm. "Thank you." She looked up at him then. Really looked at him. Not the billionaire. Not the broken groom from the ballroom. Just Ethan. Snow reflected softly across the windows around them, while distant headlights moved slowly through Manhattan streets below. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "There is something I need to ask you." Claire waited quietly. Ethan hesitated. Billionaires were still not supposed to hesitate. Why did you stay? Claire blinked softly. What do you mean? After everything. Ethan's voice lowered. After the ballroom. After the humiliation. After the way I treated you. Claire looked down at her coffee cup for a long moment before answering. Because if I walked away, she said softly, the wrong people would have won again. Ethan felt something tighten painfully inside his chest. Not guilt this time. Admiration. Respect. Something deeper than either. Claire gathered the final folders slowly and stood. I should go? The subway gets crowded during snowstorms. Ethan stood immediately. I will have a driver take you home. Claire smiled gently. I survived New York trains for 6 years. I think I can handle one more snowstorm. Ethan almost smiled back. Almost. They walked together through the quiet hallway toward the elevators while snow continued falling outside in soft silver waves. Near the lobby entrance, Claire paused to put on her coat. Ethan watched silently. Then she noticed something near the reception desk. One crooked framed photograph hanging slightly uneven on the wall. An old foundation event picture. Claire walked over instinctively and straightened it carefully with both hands. Tiny movement. Tiny detail. Ethan stared at her quietly while she stepped back to check the frame alignment. You really cannot help fixing things, can you? He asked softly. Claire looked toward him beneath the warm lobby lights. Snow drifted behind the glass doors outside. Some things deserve to stay standing, she whispered. Ethan held her gaze for several seconds longer than necessary. Then finally, quietly, honestly, he said the words nobody in that ballroom would have ever imagined hearing from him. Would you let me take you to dinner sometime? Claire blinked in surprise. Ethan gave the smallest smile. Without cameras. Without billionaires. Without weddings. Silence. Soft and warm. Then Claire smiled back gently for the first time since he met her. I think, she said quietly, you finally learned how to ask properly. Spring arrived quietly in Manhattan 4 months later. The snow disappeared from sidewalks. Trees inside Central Park slowly turned green again. And for the first time in years, the Callaway Foundation building no longer felt cold. Sunlight filled the glass lobby each morning while employees moved through the halls with something rare in corporate towers. Trust. Claire stood beside the foundation reception desk adjusting fresh white lilies inside a crystal vase when the elevator doors opened across the lobby. Ethan stepped out holding 2 coffee cups and a stack of legal folders beneath one arm. Several employees greeted him warmly as he passed. He answered every single one. Months ago, he would have walked through the building without noticing half the people around him. Claire noticed that change more than anyone. You are late, she said softly as he approached. Ethan handed her 1 coffee cup immediately. I am a billionaire. We call it strategic timing. Claire smiled faintly. That sounds expensive. It usually is. Their eyes met for half a second longer than necessary. Small moment. Quiet moment. The kind neither of them rushed anymore. Ethan placed the folders onto the reception desk. Federal prosecutors finalized the Whitmore settlement this morning. Claire's expression softened slightly. Completely. Ethan nodded once. Every remaining foundation asset was recovered. Claire exhaled quietly. Not relief exactly. Something gentler. Closure. The last 4 months had changed everything. Vanessa Whitmore disappeared from every charity board and financial publication in America. Multiple executives connected to the offshore network faced investigation. More importantly, Richard Bennett's name had finally been restored publicly. Newspapers called him the whistleblower who tried to expose the fraud years before anyone else noticed it. Claire still cried the first time she saw that headline printed beside her father's photograph. Not because the world suddenly cared. Because the truth finally survived long enough to be heard. Ethan watched her carefully now while morning sunlight moved across the marble lobby floor. There is one more thing, he said quietly. Claire looked up. Ethan slid a folded letter toward her. Official cream-colored stationery. Chicago Financial Ethics Institute. Claire blinked in surprise. They contacted you? Yesterday. Ethan leaned lightly against the reception desk. They increased their offer. Claire opened the letter slowly while reading the new proposal. Senior Investigative Director. Full relocation package. National Oversight Authority. The kind of opportunity most people spent entire careers chasing. Ethan studied her expression carefully while she read. You deserve it, he said quietly. Claire lowered the letter slowly. You sound like you already decided I am leaving. Ethan gave a small smile without humor. I spent most of my life trying to control outcomes. His eyes met hers steadily. I am learning not everything valuable should be controlled. Silence settled softly between them while employees moved through the lobby in the background. Claire looked down at the offer again. For months ago, she would have accepted immediately. Escape had always been survival. But things felt different now. She looked toward the giant foundation windows where children from one of the scholarship programs toured the lobby with bright, excited faces. One little girl stopped beside the donor wall, pointing toward Richard Bennett's newly engraved name near the Transparency Initiative plaque. Claire's breath caught quietly in her chest. Ethan noticed immediately. "Your father belongs there," he said softly. Claire looked at the engraved name for a long moment, while sunlight reflected across the polished wall beneath it. Richard Bennett. Truth matters most when it costs something. Her father once said that sentence while drinking burnt coffee at 3 in the morning beside stacks of investigation files. At the time, she thought truth destroyed people. Maybe sometimes it simply revealed them instead. Eleanor entered the lobby carrying several folders beneath one arm before stopping near them. "The board approved the veterans' housing expansion," she announced calmly. Then she noticed the Chicago letter in Claire's hand. "Oh." Ethan crossed his arms immediately. "Please do not start." Eleanor looked almost amused. "I said nothing." Claire smiled despite herself. Eleanor stepped closer and lowered her voice gently. "For what it is worth, Miss Bennett, this building became human again after you arrived." Claire looked genuinely touched. "Thank you." Eleanor glanced briefly toward Ethan before speaking again. "Some people build companies. Very few rebuild people." Then she walked calmly toward the elevators, leaving silence behind her like intentional wisdom. Ethan rubbed one hand against the back of his neck awkwardly. "She enjoys making conversations uncomfortable." Claire laughed softly. Real laughter this time. Warm enough to stop him completely for half a second. "No," she whispered. "I think she enjoys honesty." Outside the lobby windows, spring rain began falling lightly against the city streets. Gentle rain. Nothing like the storm from that wedding night months earlier. Ethan looked toward it quietly. "There is something I never told you." Claire waited patiently. Ethan exhaled slowly. "The night of the wedding, after you left the ballroom," his jaw tightened slightly at the memory. "I realized I could not remember the names of half the people congratulating me." Claire listened quietly. Ethan continued. "But I remembered yours." Silence. Soft piano music drifted faintly from somewhere deeper inside the building. Claire lowered the Chicago offer carefully onto the reception desk. "I used to think invisible people stayed invisible because nobody noticed them," she said softly. "Now?" Ethan asked quietly. Claire looked directly at him beneath warm spring light and falling rain outside the windows. "Now I think some people stay quiet because they are waiting to see who is worth speaking to." Ethan smiled then. Not the polished billionaire smile reporters photographed for magazines. Something smaller. Honest. Human. The little girl near the donor wall suddenly waved excitedly toward Claire before running to catch up with her tour group. Claire waved back instinctively. Ethan watched her for another long moment before speaking softly. "So." Claire looked toward him again. "So, are you still going to Chicago?" Claire glanced once more at her father's name on the wall, then at the foundation around her, then finally at Ethan standing quietly beside her holding untouched coffee beneath warm spring rain and soft morning light. She smiled gently. "I think," she whispered, "some things deserve to stay standing."